I won $54 million in the lottery. After a lifetime of being treated like a financial burden to my family, I decided to run one final test before claiming the ticket. I sat in a hospital waiting room and called my mother begging for emergency surgery money. Her response was so cruel, it shattered whatever hope I had left. But what I did next with those $54 million changed my family dynamic forever and brought their fake empire crashing down. My name is Natalie, 33 years old, and I am a freelance digital illustrator. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family members who underestimated your worth and treated you like a disappointment. Growing up in our upscale suburb meant privilege to outsiders. But inside our sprawling home, emotional coldness permeated every single corner. I was always the scapegoat. It was a rainy Tuesday evening when my entire life flipped upside down. I was sitting on a cracked vinyl chair in the freezing waiting room of a local emergency clinic. I did not actually have a medical emergency. I was perfectly healthy. Instead, tucked safely inside the inner pocket of my cheap denim jacket, was a small piece of paper worth exactly $54 million in cash after taxes. I had checked the winning Powerball numbers on my phone at least 20 times. The reality was finally settling in. I was wealthy beyond comprehension. But before I hired a wealth management team or claimed a single dime of that massive fortune, I needed to know if my family would catch me if I was truly falling. Growing up, I was the designated failure. My mother, Patricia, worshipped country club status, luxury brands, and social appearances. My older sister, Audrey, was her absolute golden child. I was just the struggling artist who brought endless shame to the family. I took a deep, shaky breath, unlocked my phone, and dialed my mother's number. When she answered, I forced a frantic, desperate tremor into my voice. "Mom, I am at the emergency room right now." I gasped out, pretending to cry. "The doctor says my appendix is severely inflamed and I need surgery immediately, but my freelance health insurance lapsed last week because of a system billing error. The hospital administration needs a $900 deposit upfront to admit me for the operation. Please, Mom, I am in so much pain right now." I held my breath and waited for the maternal panic to kick in. I waited for her to ask which hospital I was at or tell me she was on her way. Instead, there was a long, deeply annoyed sigh on the other end of the line. "Natalie, do you have any earthly idea what time it is?" My mother snapped, her tone dripping with absolute disdain. "I am currently at the country club. I am meeting with the event florist. We are picking out the custom centerpieces for Audrey's 10-year anniversary gala. I absolutely cannot deal with your dramatic financial crises right now." I gripped the plastic edges of my phone tighter, my heart sinking into my stomach. "Mom, please, this is a literal medical emergency," I pleaded, keeping up the act. "I just need a small loan to get through the hospital doors. I promise I will pay you back every single cent very soon." Patricia let out a cold, sharp laugh that echoed through the phone speaker. "Your poverty is a choice, Natalie. You chose to draw silly little pictures on a computer instead of getting a real job like your sister. Figure it out. You being sick is not my problem." And with that cruel final statement, the line went completely dead. She actually hung up on me. I sat there listening to the dial tone, the harsh reality of her words sinking deep into my chest. My own flesh and blood mother would rather let my appendix rupture than interrupt her luxurious floral appointment. But I had to finish the test. I quickly opened my contacts and dialed my older sister, Audrey. The phone rang exactly twice before it was sent straight to voicemail. 1 second later, an automated text message popped up brightly on my cracked phone screen. It read, "Cannot talk right now. I am busy closing a massive $1 million real estate deal. Stop calling me." I stared at the glowing screen of my cheap phone in pure disbelief. Audrey was a flashy real estate agent who loved to flaunt her wealth online. Yet she could not even spare 30 seconds to save my life. This proved everything I needed to know about greedy relatives. It was approaching 2 in the morning. Thunder rattled the thin glass of the clinic windows, and heavy rain pounded against the roof. I was fully prepared to call it a night, pack up my fake tears, and drive home to my cramped apartment. I had my answer. My blood family was rotten to the core. But just as I stood up to leave, the automatic double doors hissed open violently. A sudden gust of wind and heavy rain swept into the sterile hospital lobby. Jasmine, my brother, Jason's wife, burst through the entrance. She was completely soaked from head to toe. Her light blue pediatric nursing scrubs clung tightly to her shivering frame, and her dark curly hair was plastered against her cheeks. She stood there, panting, her chest heaving, as she scanned the empty waiting room. When she locked eyes with me, she let out a loud gasp of relief and practically ran across the slippery linoleum floor. Before I could even speak, Jasmine dropped her heavy canvas tote bag and wrapped her freezing cold arms around my shoulders. "Natalie, are you okay?" she asked breathlessly, her voice shaking from the chill and the adrenaline. "Have they taken you back for surgery yet? I am so sorry it took me this long." The highway was completely flooded and my windshield wipers kept getting stuck. I was absolutely stunned into silence. Jasmine lived 3 hours away in a different city. She had just finished a brutal 12-hour shift at the pediatric ward. Yet here she was standing in a freezing emergency room in the middle of a severe thunderstorm, having risked her own life driving a beat-up older car just to get to me. Before I could process the shock, Jasmine unzipped a wet pocket on her scrub top and pulled out a damp bank envelope. She shoved it directly into my hands. It was a thick wad of crumpled $20 and $10 bills. "I know you said the hospital wanted $900 up front." Jasmine spoke quickly, her eyes wide with desperate concern. "There is $300 in cash right there. It is all the money I had stashed away from my holiday bonus, plus whatever the ATM would let me pull out before it completely locked me out." She then reached into her pocket again and pulled out a faded blue credit card, pressing it firmly onto the stack of cash. "Put the rest of the deposit on this card. It only has a $500 limit, but I just paid the minimum balance yesterday. There should be exactly enough room left on it to cover the rest of your surgery. Hurry, take it to the front desk before your appendix ruptures." I looked down at the money and the cheap, low-limit credit card. My heart physically ached. "Jasmine," I said softly, "why do you only have a credit card with a $500 limit? You work full-time as a registered nurse. You make good money." Jasmine looked away, suddenly deeply ashamed. She wrapped her wet arms around herself to stop the shivering. "Jason takes my paycheck," she whispered, her voice barely carrying over the sound of the thunder outside. "He forces my hospital payroll to direct deposit straight into his private account. He says I do not understand how to manage household finances. He gives me a strict cash allowance of $100 a week for my gas and my groceries. If I spend even $1 over that amount, he yells at me for hours." Pure blinding rage surged through my veins. My brother Jason was a regional sales manager making a massive six-figure salary, yet he treated his hard-working, beautiful wife like a prisoner in her own home. He was financially abusing her, controlling her every move to keep her trapped. Jason checks the mileage on my car every single weekend. Jasmine continued, her eyes darting nervously toward the hospital entrance, as if my brother might suddenly walk through those doors. "I told him I was picking up an emergency overnight shift at the hospital tonight. If he finds out I drove 300 miles down here to help you, he will lock me out of the house again. But I could not let you die, Natalie. I just could not." I tried to hand the money back, but Jasmine aggressively pushed my hands away. "If the credit card declines, we still have one more option," she said with fierce determination. She touched the vintage gold band on her right hand. It was her late grandmother's wedding ring, the only valuable family heirloom she possessed. "There is a 24-hour pawn shop right off the interstate exit. I can get the rest of the cash there. We are not leaving this hospital until you get that surgery." I stared at this incredible African-American woman standing before me. My own wealthy mother and sister had left me to rot over a minor inconvenience. But Jasmine, who was being systematically abused and financially drained by my own brother, was willing to pawn her most precious family heirloom to save my life. She was shivering, exhausted, and risking the wrath of a toxic husband just to make sure I was safe. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes, and for the first time that night they were not fake. The test was officially over. I knew exactly who the real villains were in my family, and I knew exactly who deserved to be saved. I gently pushed Jasmine's hands back toward her chest, wrapping her freezing fingers tightly around the damp bank envelope and the faded blue credit card. Jasmine, you need to listen to me very carefully right now, I said, keeping my voice incredibly steady so she would not panic. I do not need your money anymore. While you were driving here through the storm, the hospital billing supervisor came out to the waiting room to speak with me. They found a massive loophole in my lapsed health insurance policy. Because the original cancellation was a clerical error on the insurance company's side, they are legally required to cover the entire cost of the emergency appendectomy. The surgery is completely paid for. I am just waiting for the nurses to take me to the back room to get prepped. Jasmine blinked in heavy confusion, her tense shoulders dropping as the sheer exhaustion washed over her body. Are you absolutely sure, Natalie? You are not just saying that to protect me, she asked, searching my face for any sign of a lie. I forced the most reassuring and warm smile I could muster. I am absolutely sure. You literally drove through a dangerous hurricane in the middle of the night just to save me. I will never ever forget what you did tonight. But right now, you need to get back in your car and drive safely home before Jason wakes up and realizes you are missing. If he checks the mileage on your dashboard tomorrow morning, tell him you got lost on the detour to the hospital for your overnight shift. Do whatever you have to do to stay safe. I will be perfectly fine. Jasmine let out a long, shaky breath, nodding slowly. She hugged me one more time, much tighter than before, and turned to walk back out into the raging storm. I stood in the bright, sterile hospital lobby and watched through the automatic glass doors as her beat-up sedan pulled out of the flooded parking lot and disappeared completely into the heavy rain. Once she was completely out of sight, my entire demeanor shifted. The fake sick routine vanished instantly. I walked out of the sliding hospital doors, ignoring the freezing rain that soaked right into my cheap denim jacket, and marched straight toward my own rusty 10-year-old car, parked in the corner of the lot. I climbed into the driver's seat, slammed the door shut, and aggressively locked it. The silence inside the car was deafening, save for the rhythmic drumming of rain against the metal roof. My hands were shaking uncontrollably, not from the cold, but from the sheer magnitude of what was about to happen. I reached deep into my inner jacket pocket and pulled out the small crumpled piece of thermal paper. I turned on the dim overhead dome light and stared at the printed numbers. $54 million. That was the exact cash payout sitting right in my hands. It was more money than my superficial mother Patricia could ever dream of seeing in her entire lifetime. It was more money than my arrogant brother Jason and my fake successful sister Audrey could ever hope to steal or borrow. For 33 years, I had been the designated family punching bag. I was the financial burden, the artistic failure, the constant dark cloud of disappointment. They built their entire inflated egos by standing right on my neck. And tonight, Patricia and Audrey had both proven they would gladly let me die, rather than part with a single dollar or interrupt their luxurious suburban lives. Meanwhile, Jason was actively terrorizing the only person in the family who possessed a genuinely kind heart. Running away and quietly living a rich, peaceful life by myself was no longer a valid option. If I just disappeared with my millions, Jason would continue to crush Jasmine into dust. Patricia would continue to play the wealthy, untouchable matriarch, and Audrey would continue to flaunt her fake perfection. I needed a weapon. A very specific, highly destructive, entirely legal weapon. I picked up my phone and opened the web browser. I searched for the most ruthless, high-profile wealth management attorneys located in Manhattan. I bypassed the flashy local advertisements and dug straight into the top-tier corporate law firms. I needed someone who specialized in aggressive asset protection, blind trusts, and hostile financial takeovers. Within 10 minutes, I found the perfect candidate. He was a senior partner known for entirely dismantling corporate adversaries without leaving a single trace behind. I opened my email application and started typing a message to his direct encrypted contact address. My name is Natalie. I am the sole owner of the winning Powerball ticket drawn 3 days ago. The cash value is $54 million. I need you to claim this ticket on my behalf through an anonymous holding company. But more importantly, I need to hire your firm to conduct a comprehensive forensic financial investigation into 3 specific individuals in my family. I have a very substantial budget, and I require absolute secrecy. Let me know how soon we can meet in person. I hit send. I leaned back against the worn fabric of my car seat and watched the rain wash over my windshield. The gears were officially in motion. My family thought they held all the power because they had a little bit of money and a lot of arrogance. But they had absolutely no idea what real financial power looked like. I was not just going to cut them off. I was going to systematically dismantle their fake financial empires and expose every single lie they used to maintain their precious country club status. The Thanksgiving holiday was exactly 1 month away. Patricia always threw a massive, pretentious dinner party to show off for the extended relatives. It would be the absolute perfect battleground. I started my engine, shifted the car into drive, and pulled out into the dark, stormy night, ready to prepare for war. Exactly 1 month later, the day of battle arrived. It was Thanksgiving afternoon, and the crisp autumn air was sharp and cold. I drove my rusty sedan up the long, winding road leading to my mother Patricia's lavish suburban home. I parked at the very end of the circular driveway, making sure my beat-up car was sandwiched right between Jason's shiny new sports car and Audrey's expensive leased luxury SUV. I had purposely worn a slightly frayed beige sweater and faded jeans. I wanted to look exactly like the poor, pathetic financial failure they all fully expected to see. I walked up the grand brick steps and rang the doorbell. The heavy oak door swung open, and Patricia stood there in a tailored silk blouse, dripping in expensive pearl jewelry. Her fake holiday smile instantly dropped the second her eyes landed on my cheap clothes. She looked me up and down with absolute disgust. "Natalie, you could have at least tried to look somewhat presentable for the holidays," she sneered, immediately blocking the main entrance with her body. "Do not track mud from your cheap shoes onto my imported foyer rug. Go around the back and use the side kitchen door. Jasmine is struggling in there, and you need to go make yourself useful." I did not argue or defend myself. I simply nodded, turned around, and walked down the side path of the massive brick house. I opened the heavy kitchen door and was instantly hit by a massive wall of suffocating heat. The kitchen was an absolute disaster zone. Jasmine was standing over the giant industrial stove, frantically basting a massive 20-pound turkey, while simultaneously stirring 2 different pots of boiling gravy. She looked completely exhausted. Dark, heavy circles hung under her eyes, and a thin layer of sweat coated her forehead. She was wearing a stained apron over a modest dress. When she saw me, a genuine smile broke through her intense exhaustion. "Natalie, you made it," she whispered quickly, wiping her greasy hands on a towel. I immediately stepped forward and hugged her tightly. "Are they really making you cook this entire massive feast completely alone?" I asked, my blood already starting to boil. Jasmine just sighed heavily and nodded toward the open French doors leading directly into the formal living room. I glanced through the glass panes. Audrey was lounging gracefully on the expensive white leather sofa, sipping an imported glass of champagne. She was wearing a flawless designer dress, laughing loudly at a joke Jason was telling. Neither of them had lifted a single finger to help Jasmine all morning. Audrey caught me staring from the kitchen and sauntered over, her crystal glass clinking as she walked. "Well, look who finally decided to show up and grace us with her presence," Audrey mocked loudly, leaning against the marble kitchen island. "Still wearing clothes straight from the clearance rack, I see. I thought your little freelance art career was supposed to make you rich and famous by now." Patricia walked into the kitchen right behind her, carrying an empty wine glass for Jasmine to refill. "I told her this exact thing would happen 15 years ago," Patricia chimed in, glaring at me with deep resentment. "When you turned 18 and refused to study a respectable business degree, I knew you would end up exactly like this. You threw away a perfectly good future to draw silly little pictures on a computer. And that is exactly why I kicked you out of my house. I refuse to fund your lazy delusions. I gripped the edge of the granite counter, keeping my temper strictly in check. You kicked me out on the street with absolutely nothing to my name, I replied calmly, keeping my voice perfectly even. Yet you gladly paid Audrey's entire $80,000 college tuition in full. Audrey laughed an obnoxious high-pitched laugh and took another long sip of her champagne. That is because I actually have real ambition, Natalie. Mom made a smart financial investment in my potential. I am a highly successful real estate agent closing million-dollar deals. You are just a starving artist begging your family for hospital handouts in the middle of the night. I smiled politely at my sister, refusing to let her cruel words sting. I knew exactly what my private investigators had recently uncovered about her fake success. I knew about her crushing credit card debt and her failing business, but I kept my mouth shut. I simply grabbed a peeling knife from the counter and turned to help Jasmine with the potatoes. Let them feel superior for just a little while longer. The trap was already set, and they were walking blindly right into it. 2 hours later, the grand dining room was completely prepared for the holiday meal. The long mahogany table was covered in an imported lace runner, heavy silver cutlery, and massive crystal centerpieces that blocked my view of anyone sitting across from me. Jasmine silently carried platter after platter of steaming food from the hot kitchen, her arms visibly trembling from the sheer weight of the 20-pound turkey. She carefully placed the massive bird at the center of the table right in front of Jason, who did not even bother to look up from his phone to say thank you. I took my assigned seat at the very far end of the table, as far away from the center of attention as physically possible. Once everyone was finally seated, Audrey stood up from her chair and loudly tapped her manicured fingernail against her crystal champagne flute. The sharp ringing sound commanded immediate attention from the entire room. Before we carve the turkey that Jasmine so adequately prepared, I have a special surprise for everyone, Audrey announced with a wide theatrical smile. She gestured toward the marble sideboard where 3 large silver trays were covered with heated domes. I decided to elevate our family holiday this year. I hired the most exclusive luxury catering company in the city to prepare our appetizers. Audrey walked over and dramatically lifted the silver domes to reveal hundreds of tiny imported caviar blinis, expensive truffle tartlets, and rare artisan cheeses. Patricia immediately clapped her hands together in absolute delight, loudly praising Audrey for her incredible generosity and refined taste. Jason quickly grabbed a handful of the expensive appetizers and shoved them onto his plate. Jasmine just stood quietly by the kitchen door, looking down at her worn shoes. Audrey then grabbed a small folded piece of thick embossed cardstock from the sideboard. Instead of taking her seat, she confidently marched straight down the length of the dining room table toward me. She stopped right behind my chair and aggressively dropped the thick paper directly onto my empty porcelain plate. I looked down. It was an itemized invoice from the luxury catering company. The total amount due was $1,200. Since you selfishly tried to ruin my 10-year anniversary preparation last month with your pathetic fake hospital drama, Audrey sneered, leaning down so her face was inches from mine. I figured you could pay for the starters today. Consider it your way of apologizing to the family for being such a massive financial burden. Jason laughed loudly from the other end of the table, his mouth completely full of truffle cheese. Yeah, Natalie, he echoed mockingly. It is about time you actually contributed something of value to this family, instead of constantly draining our resources. Pay the bill or leave the food alone. I stared at the ridiculous $1,200 invoice resting on my plate. I could have paid it 1,000 times over without even checking my bank balance. But that was not the point. The sheer audacity of Audrey throwing a lavish party to maintain her fake wealthy image and then demanding her younger sister foot the bill was sickening. I calmly picked up the thick cardstock and slid it smoothly back across the polished mahogany table until it rested in front of Audrey's empty chair. I am not paying a $1,200 catering bill for food I did not order, Audrey, I said, my voice perfectly level and entirely devoid of emotion. especially when Jasmine has been standing over a hot stove for 10 straight hours cooking the actual meal we are about to eat. If you wanted to pretend to be generous, you should have paid for it yourself. The entire dining room went completely dead silent. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Patricia's face turned a dark, violent shade of red. "How dare you speak to your sister that way?" Patricia shrieked, slamming her palm flat against the table so hard the crystal glasses rattled. "Audrey went out of her way to elevate this dinner, and you have the absolute nerve to insult her and defend the hired help." Jasmine flinched visibly at being called the hired help, but she remained completely silent. "You listen to me right now, you ungrateful brat," Patricia continued, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You owe Audrey an apology, and you owe her that money. If you refuse to pay your fair share for this family gathering, you can get out of my house right this second." I looked my mother dead in the eyes. "I do not have $1,200 to waste on caviar, Mom, and I am not leaving until I finish my dinner." Patricia stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "If you do not hand over your debit card to Audrey right now, I will call the local police department and have you officially trespassed from my property," Patricia threatened, pointing a trembling finger at the front door. "You will be dragged off my front lawn in handcuffs in front of the entire neighborhood. Do not test me, Natalie." I sat perfectly still, processing the threat. My own mother was willing to have me arrested on Thanksgiving over an appetizer bill I did not authorize. The hatred they held for me was blinding them to their own impending destruction. I needed to de-escalate just enough to stay in the house because the real trap was about to be sprung. I forced myself to take a deep breath and looked away from my furious mother. "Fine," I said softly, picking up my heavy silver fork. "I will apologize for disrupting the holiday mood, but I am absolutely not paying that ridiculous invoice." Patricia huffed indignantly, but slowly sat back down in her chair, eager to maintain the grand illusion of a perfect family holiday for her own fragile ego. The thick, heavy tension still hung over the dining room like a dark, suffocating cloud. Nobody spoke as we began passing the steaming side dishes around the table. Jason, sensing the incredibly awkward silence, decided to completely deflect the negative energy away from his precious sister and mother. He chose the easiest and most vulnerable target in the entire room. He aggressively carved a large, thick slice of the 20-pound turkey Jasmine had spent all morning meticulously preparing. He shoved a massive piece into his mouth, chewed it exactly twice, and then dramatically spat it right out into his expensive linen napkin. "Are you actually kidding me with this?" Jason groaned loudly, dropping his heavy silver fork onto his fine porcelain plate with a loud, sharp clatter. "This turkey is as dry as a desert." "Jasmine, you had one single simple job today. Mom graciously allowed you to use her state-of-the-art luxury kitchen, and you managed to completely ruin the absolute centerpiece of the main course. You literally cannot do anything right." Jasmine froze instantly, with a heavy serving spoon still clutched tightly in her hand. Her exhausted shoulders instantly slumped forward, and she quickly lowered her head, her dark eyes fixed entirely on her empty plate. "I am so sorry, Jason," she whispered softly, her voice trembling slightly under the crushing weight of his public cruelty. "I tried to baste the bird every single hour, but this oven runs significantly hotter than ours at home." Jason scoffed loudly and aggressively rolled his eyes toward the crystal chandelier above us. "Do not make pathetic excuses for your own sheer incompetence," he snapped back viciously. "It is exactly like your complete inability to manage simple household finances. Which reminds me, Mom, you will absolutely love hearing about this. I had to enact some incredibly strict disciplinary measures at home recently to teach my wife a vital lesson about budgeting." Audrey immediately leaned forward across the mahogany table, suddenly highly entertained by the public humiliation of her hard-working sister-in-law. "Oh, please do tell us," Jason Audrey urged, with a vicious little smirk playing on her glossy lips. "Well," Jason continued arrogantly casually, gesturing toward Jasmine with his silver butter knife. "Jasmine decided to waste an entire tank of premium gas last month, driving 300 miles in the middle of a massive thunderstorm. She apparently thought her pathetic little nursing salary gave her the absolute right to rush to Natalie's fake medical rescue in the middle of the night. So, to teach her a harsh lesson about wasting my hard-earned money, I completely canceled her car insurance policy last week. She has been taking the dangerous public bus to the hospital for her midnight shifts ever since. My stomach physically churned with pure, violent disgust. Jasmine had been waiting alone at sketchy city bus stops in the freezing November weather after working brutal 12-hour pediatric shifts, all because she had a kind heart and tried to save my life. I looked over at Jasmine, whose eyes were now brimming with heavy, unshed tears, as she continued staring blankly down at her lap. She looked entirely broken. I could not hold my tongue back for another single second. "Are you completely insane, Jason?" I demanded, slamming both of my hands down on the polished mahogany table so hard the crystal glasses violently shook. "She works a full-time demanding medical job. You steal her paychecks from her bank account and now you take away her safe transportation. That is textbook financial abuse, and you are sitting here bragging about it to our mother like it is a hilarious joke." Jason threw his head back and laughed incredibly loudly. It was a cold, hollow sound that made the hair on my arms stand up. "Look who suddenly found her brave little voice," he mocked cruelly, leaning far across the expensive table and pointing a threatening finger directly at my face. "You are a broke, pathetic loser, Natalie. You have exactly $0 to your name and absolutely zero power in this real world. You live in a cramped, disgusting apartment and constantly beg your own family for emergency medical handouts. Do not ever think you have the right to sit in my family home and tell me how to manage my own wife. Jasmine belongs to me, and you are nothing but a temporary, unwanted guest who is one wrong word away from being thrown out into the freezing cold dirt where you belong." I stared directly into Jason's smug face, my fingernails digging so deeply into my palms that the skin nearly broke. He genuinely believed he held all the cards in this sick, twisted family dynamic. Before I could unleash the absolute fury boiling inside my chest and call him out for his disgusting behavior, Patricia suddenly cleared her throat, loudly, cutting right through the heavy, suffocating tension in the dining room. "That is quite enough from both of you," she commanded, smoothing down her silk blouse with perfectly manicured hands. "Let us not ruin the holiday completely with petty arguments. Besides, Jason, we have some very important family business to conclude tonight before anyone leaves this table." Patricia reached over to the marble sideboard behind her chair and picked up a thick manila folder she had clearly hidden there earlier. She casually tossed it onto the polished mahogany table. It slid smoothly across the shiny surface and stopped right next to my empty porcelain plate. I looked down at the thick stack of papers. The bold black letters printed at the very top of the first page read, "Quitclaim Deed." I immediately knew exactly what this was about. When my father passed away 5 years ago, he left the bulk of his massive estate and life insurance policies to my mother, but he left one single asset solely to me. It was 50 acres of undeveloped barren land, out in a rural county, 2 hours outside the city limits. For years, Patricia and Audrey had endlessly mocked me for inheriting a worthless patch of dirt and rocks, while they lived in absolute luxury. Audrey leaned forward, resting her elbows on the lace table runner and lacing her fingers together. Her glossy lips curled into a predatory, calculated smile. "Since you are currently unemployed and completely unable to pay your basic medical bills, we decided to do you a massive favor today," Audrey stated smoothly, acting as if she were a generous saint. "My real estate company needs a minor tax write-off for the upcoming fiscal year. I am willing to take that completely useless piece of rural dirt off your hands. All you have to do is sign that legal deed transferring full legal ownership of the property over to my company. I will even give you a crisp $100 bill for your trouble." She slid a heavy, expensive gold pen across the table. It hit the side of my crystal water glass with a sharp, sudden clink. I stared at the heavy gold pen and then looked back up at my sister. My mind was racing rapidly. Why would a supposedly successful real estate agent who deals exclusively in million-dollar mansions suddenly want 50 acres of dead grass in the middle of absolutely nowhere? It made zero sense. I slowly pushed the legal document back toward the center of the table. I am not signing over my only inheritance without having an attorney review the paperwork first, I replied evenly. It was a gift from Dad, and I am not giving it away for your corporate tax write-off. Patricia's face instantly hardened into a mask of pure ice. She slowly reached into the pocket of her tailored trousers and pulled out a small black velvet jewelry box. She placed it squarely in the middle of the dining table and flipped the lid open. The box was completely empty. My vintage diamond starburst brooch is missing from my bedroom vanity, Patricia announced, her voice dangerously quiet and dripping with venom. And Jasmine has been the exact only person wandering freely through the house and the hallways all afternoon. Jasmine gasped loudly, her hands flying up to cover her mouth in absolute horror. "Mom, I swear I never went upstairs." Jasmine pleaded, fresh tears instantly spilling down her cheeks. "I was in the kitchen the entire time cooking the turkey and preparing the side dishes. I would never steal from you." Patricia completely ignored Jasmine's crying and locked her cold, dead eyes directly on me. "This is not a negotiation, Natalie. You are going to pick up that gold pen and sign the deed right now. If you refuse, I will immediately call the local police department and file a formal felony report for grand larceny against Jasmine." Jason leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms, looking incredibly pleased with his mother's vicious plan. "You know exactly how the justice system treats people who look like her, Natalie," Jason taunted cruelly, his voice dripping with a subtle racial malice that made my blood run entirely cold. "The police will not hesitate to arrest her on the spot if Mom makes the call. They will put her in handcuffs right here in the dining room. A felony theft charge will trigger an automatic revocation of her state nursing license," Jason added cheerfully, completely unbothered by the prospect of his own wife going to jail. "She will lose her beloved pediatric career, she will never work in a hospital again, and she will likely spend the next 5 years rotting in a state prison. It is your choice, Natalie. Sign the paper or ruin her life." The sheer, calculated evil of their plan took my breath away. My mother, my sister, and my own brother had conspired to completely destroy an innocent, hardworking African-American woman just to steal a piece of rural land from me. They were using Jasmine's entire livelihood, her nursing license, and her physical freedom as a hostage to extort my inheritance. I looked at Jasmine, who was now sobbing quietly into her hands, completely terrified of losing everything she had worked so hard to build. The trap was officially set, but they had absolutely no idea who they were truly messing with tonight. I looked from my mother's cold face to my brother Jason's sneering smile, and finally to Jasmine, who was trembling violently in her chair. The trap was officially set, but they had absolutely no idea who they were truly messing with tonight. I needed to play my part perfectly. I let my shoulders slump forward and forced my hands to shake as I reached out and barely touched the heavy gold pen resting on the polished mahogany table. I widened my eyes, injecting absolute panic and desperation into my voice. "Mom, please," I begged, letting my voice crack just the right amount. "Do not involve the police. Jasmine did not do anything wrong. You cannot ruin her entire career and send her to prison over a piece of inherited land." Patricia crossed her arms over her expensive silk blouse, looking down her nose at me like I was a disgusting insect that had crawled onto her expensive dining room rug. "Then pick up the pen and sign the paper, Natalie. It is a very simple transaction. Stop causing unnecessary drama and just do what you are told for once in your miserable life." I swallowed hard, acting exactly like the cornered, helpless younger sister they fully expected me to be. "I will sign it," I whispered defeatedly, pulling my hands back to my lap. "I will give Audrey the land. But please, just give me 72 hours. I just want to take this deed down to the free legal aid clinic on Monday morning so a public defender can explain the tax liabilities to me. I cannot afford to be hit with a surprise property tax bill next year from the state. Just give me 3 days to review the fine print and I will sign it completely over to Audrey on Wednesday. Jason let out a loud barking laugh, slapping his heavy hand against the table. Did you hear that, Audrey? She wants to take your professional corporate contract to a free public clinic. Those hack lawyers are going to charge her in food stamps. It is absolutely pathetic. Audrey rolled her eyes but looked incredibly smug, clearly thrilled by my total submission. Let the poor girl have her 3 days, Jason. It does not matter who reads the deed. It is an ironclad legal transfer drafted by my own expensive attorneys. You have exactly 72 hours, Natalie. We will meet at my downtown leasing office on Wednesday at exactly 12 noon. If you do not show up with your signature on that dotted line, Mom makes the phone call, and Jasmine leaves the hospital in the back of a police cruiser. I nodded quickly, maintaining the terrified facade. I stood up from the table, grabbed the thick manila folder with trembling hands, and practically ran out of the dining room. I did not say another word. I could hear their cruel, triumphant laughter echoing through the grand foyer as I let myself out the side door. The second I stepped off Patricia's manicured front lawn and into the freezing autumn air, the fake panic vanished completely from my face. My hands instantly stopped shaking. My breathing slowed into a calm, calculated rhythm. I tossed the manila folder onto the passenger seat of my rusty sedan and started the engine. I did not drive back to my cramped apartment. I was done playing the victim. Instead, I drove straight onto the interstate, heading directly toward the towering glass skyline of the city. 45 minutes later, I walked into the sleek, ultra-modern lobby of a premium corporate high-rise in the financial district. I bypassed the receptionist and took the private executive elevator up to the top floor. Sitting behind a massive custom marble desk was David Harrison, the ruthless high-profile wealth management attorney I had retained a month ago. He was a financial bulldog who specialized in hiding assets and dismantling corporate adversaries without leaving a single trace. I walked into his office and dropped the quitclaim deed directly onto his pristine desk. David picked it up, adjusted his expensive glasses, and quickly scanned the legal document. "Your sister is attempting to legally extort you," he noted calmly, his tone completely professional. "She is holding my sister-in-law's nursing license hostage with a fake felony threat," I replied, sitting down in the heavy leather chair opposite him. "I bought us exactly 3 days. I need you to authorize an unlimited budget from my $54 million trust account right now. Hire the most aggressive private investigators and forensic accountants in the state. I want a complete deep dive into 3 specific targets: Patricia, Audrey, and Jason." David set the document down and folded his hands, listening intently. "Dig into Audrey's real estate company," I commanded, my voice cold as ice. "Find out why she suddenly wants 50 acres of barren dirt in a rural county so desperately. Dig into Jason's bank accounts and find out exactly where he is hiding his wife's stolen paychecks. And dig into my mother's precious country club finances. I want every single hidden debt, every tax evasion, every forged signature, and every dirty little secret they have ever buried. By Wednesday noon, I want enough legal ammunition to completely level their entire lives." David smiled. It was a sharp, predatory grin that told me he was exactly the right man for the job. "Consider it done, Natalie. By Tuesday night, we will know exactly how many skeletons are hiding in their closets." David Harrison was a man who severely underpromised and heavily overdelivered. I did not even have to wait until Tuesday night. Less than 24 hours after I dropped the legal deed on his pristine marble desk, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from his private encrypted number. It was Monday morning, and I was sitting in my cramped apartment drinking a cheap cup of coffee. "I have the first preliminary report ready for your review," David stated, his voice completely devoid of any emotion. "You need to come down to my office right now. We started with your sister Audrey, and the findings are absolutely staggering." I immediately grabbed my jacket and drove straight back to the financial district. When I walked into his spacious office, David was already waiting for me, with a thick black binder resting in the exact center of his desk. He gestured for me to sit down. I took a deep breath and opened the heavy cover. The very first page was a comprehensive financial summary of Audrey's supposedly booming real estate corporation. I looked at the numbers and actually let out a loud gasp of pure shock. Audrey had spent the last 5 years relentlessly mocking my modest income and bragging loudly at every single family gathering about her massive multi-million-dollar property deals. She constantly posted pictures on social media, showing off her designer handbags, her lavish vacations in Europe, and her expensive champagne toasts at exclusive restaurants. She played the role of the ultimate successful golden child flawlessly. Whenever anyone in the family needed an example of hard work and ambition, Patricia would always point directly at Audrey. But the stark black and white documents sitting right in front of me told a completely different story. Audrey was an absolute fraud. Your sister has not legally closed on a single residential or commercial property in over 12 months, David explained calmly, tapping a manicured finger against a printed spreadsheet. Her real estate license is currently listed in a probationary status due to unpaid professional association fees. She has absolutely zero incoming revenue streams from any legitimate business source. I flipped to the next page, my eyes widening at the bright red numbers highlighted across the bank statements. If she has no income, how on earth is she paying for her luxury apartment and her expensive clothes? I asked, tracing my finger over a terrifying negative balance. She is not paying for them, David replied bluntly. She is currently drowning in exactly $250,000 of unsecured credit card debt. She has maxed out 14 different premium credit lines just to maintain the superficial appearance of immense wealth. She takes out new credit cards just to pay the minimum monthly balances on the old ones. Furthermore, that expensive luxury SUV she proudly parked in your mother's driveway on Thanksgiving is currently 3 full months behind on its lease payments. The bank has already issued a formal repossession order. A tow truck could legally seize that vehicle at any given moment, even while she is driving it. I leaned back in the heavy leather chair, completely stunned by the sheer magnitude of her lies. Audrey was entirely bankrupt. Her entire glamorous identity was built on a crumbling mountain of predatory, high-interest debt. No wonder she was so incredibly desperate to steal my inherited barren land. She was completely cornered and rapidly running out of borrowed time. I remembered how she threw that $1,200 catering invoice in my face, acting like she was a generous millionaire, when in reality she probably charged it to a card that was moments away from declining. But the credit card debt is actually the least of her immediate problems. David continued pulling a separate sealed legal document from the back of the binder. He slid it across the desk toward me. This is a highly confidential notice from the Internal Revenue Service. Audrey is currently under a severe federal audit. I stared at the frightening government seal stamped at the top of the letter. What exactly did she do? I asked. In a desperate attempt to secure massive tax refunds to fund her fake wealthy lifestyle, your sister heavily falsified her corporate tax returns for the past 3 years. David explained, his tone turning deadly serious. She claimed hundreds of thousands of dollars in entirely fraudulent business losses. She fabricated receipts for fake client dinners, fake property staging expenses, and fake marketing campaigns. The IRS caught the discrepancies. They are demanding immediate repayment of the stolen funds plus massive penalties. If she does not produce a massive sum of cash very soon, they will move forward with criminal tax evasion charges. Your sister is staring directly at federal prison time. Everything suddenly clicked perfectly into place. The lavish catered appetizers she tried to make me pay for. The sudden aggressive interest in my worthless rural property. The cruel threat to destroy Jasmine's nursing career if I did not sign the legal deed. Audrey was acting like a wounded, cornered animal because she was about to lose her absolute freedom. She needed a massive, sudden influx of cash to pay off the federal government and save herself from wearing a federal prison jumpsuit. I looked down at the devastating financial evidence gathered inside the thick black binder. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. My perfectly arrogant sister had unwittingly handed me the exact weapon I needed to destroy her completely. She had tormented me my entire life for being a financial failure, yet she was the one actively committing federal crimes just to look rich. The very first domino was firmly in place, and it was barely clinging to the edge of the table. I looked up from the black binder containing Audrey's ruined life and took a deep, steadying breath. But Audrey was always the reckless one, I said quietly, handing the federal audit notice back to David. What about Jason? My brother is a regional sales manager who prides himself on being an absolute financial genius. He constantly lectures the rest of us on wealth building and fiscal responsibility. He must have his accounts locked down tight. David let out a short, cynical laugh and reached into his heavy leather briefcase. He pulled out a second, perfectly organized manila folder and placed it directly in front of me on the pristine marble desk. Your brother is absolutely not a financial genius, Natalie. David stated, his voice devoid of any amusement. He is an aggressive, high-stakes gambling addict. He does not bet on sports or play at the local casinos. He gambles heavily on high-risk options trading and highly volatile cryptocurrency markets, and he is catastrophically bad at it. I opened the thick folder. The very first page was a horrifying color-coded graph showing a sheer downward plunge in his net worth. According to my forensic accounting team, Jason lost his entire life savings 3 years ago. David explained, pointing a manicured finger to a massive red dip on the financial chart. He blew through his personal retirement funds, his corporate sales bonuses, and every single liquid asset he possessed trying to cover his massive margin calls. But instead of admitting defeat and seeking professional help, he decided to start aggressively stealing to chase his mounting losses. I flipped the page, my heart pounding violently against my ribs as I saw high-resolution copies of heavy legal mortgage documents. Wait a second, I said, leaning closer to examine the complex paperwork. These are secured loan agreements, but they are legally secured against my mother's suburban estate. Mom would never willingly agree to mortgage her precious house to fund his reckless gambling addiction. She values that property and her country club status way more than her own life. David leaned forward, resting his elbows firmly on the marble desk. She did not agree to it. Jason blatantly forged her signature. Using his privileged position as the trusted golden son and the named executor of her living trust, he completely bypassed her legal consent. He secretly took out a massive $600,000 second mortgage on her house. He then took out another $200,000 personal line of credit, using her name as the primary financial guarantor. He has been committing blatant wire fraud and federal felony forgery for years right under her nose. I felt physically sick to my stomach. My fiercely arrogant brother, who just yesterday aggressively mocked my poverty and threatened to have Jasmine arrested for felony theft, was actively stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars from our own mother. If Jason defaults on these massive hidden bank loans, the bank will immediately foreclose on Patricia's house. I realized out loud, the terrifying reality finally setting in. She will be completely homeless, and she has absolutely no idea her favorite son did this to her. David nodded grimly. He is already severely defaulting on the payments. The bank sent a final legal notice of intent to foreclose just last week. Jason intercepted the certified mail so your mother would not see it. He is desperately out of time. But the absolute worst part of his severe financial crimes involves his wife. David pulled out one final printed spreadsheet from the very back of the folder. I looked down at the highlighted rows of complex routing numbers and international bank accounts. I asked my team to specifically track the direct deposits originating from Jasmine's hospital payroll. David continued, his tone softening slightly with genuine disgust. Jason told everyone he was putting her nursing salary into a joint household savings account to teach her about strict financial budgeting. That was a complete fabricated lie. He systematically routed every single one of her hard-earned paychecks into an offshore shell account located in the Cayman Islands entirely under his own exclusive name. He is intentionally draining his wife of every single dollar she earns so she can never save enough money to escape his daily abuse. He purposely canceled her car insurance to physically isolate her and keep her completely dependent on him. He is financially starving her to death while using her money to fund his disastrous stock market bets. The quiet room spun slightly as the sheer calculated evil of my brother washed over me. Jasmine had driven 3 hours in a dangerous hurricane to hand me her last $300. Meanwhile, her own husband was hoarding her stolen wages in an offshore account to fuel his sick addiction. Jason sat at that Thanksgiving table, eating the hot food Jasmine exhausted herself, cooking all while secretly draining her entire life away. My hands balled into tight, shaking fists. Audrey was a pathetic, lying fraud, but Jason was a true, ruthless monster. He needed to be completely annihilated. I took a deep breath, forcing my hands to uncurl and rest flat against the cool marble of David's desk. I looked up at him, my mind buzzing with the dark reality of my siblings' true natures. We have Audrey's federal tax evasion and Jason's massive financial fraud, I said quietly. But there is still one massive missing piece to this puzzle. Why did Audrey suddenly demand my 50 acres of rural land? If she is drowning in debt and facing federal prison, how does acquiring a barren patch of dirt 2 hours outside the city actually help her? David smiled a sharp, predatory smile. He reached into his leather briefcase one final time and pulled out a single glossy folder. He slid it across the desk. It was not a financial spreadsheet or a legal threat. It was a massive architectural blueprint stamped with the official seal of the State Zoning Commission. That land is absolutely not a barren patch of dirt anymore, David explained, tapping his expensive pen against the center of the blueprint. 2 months ago, the state government quietly approved a massive multi-billion-dollar tech hub development. 3 major Silicon Valley corporations are moving their primary data centers and corporate campuses out to that exact rural county to take advantage of the massive tax incentives. I studied the intricate blueprints. I saw the massive proposed buildings, the artificial lakes, and the newly planned highway exits. But what does that have to do with my specific inheritance, I asked. David traced a bold red line on the map. Your 50 acres sit directly between the new proposed tech campus and the main interstate highway. Without your land, the developers have absolutely no direct highway access for their construction trucks or their future corporate employees. They desperately need your property to build the primary access road. He opened the folder and pulled out a printed chain of emails. Because your sister aggressively advertises herself as the primary real estate agent for your family, the commercial developers approached her 3 months ago. They naturally assumed she was the official legal representative for your late father's estate. They submitted a formal written offer to purchase the 50 acres. I leaned forward, my heart pounding violently against my ribs. How much did they offer her? $8 million in pure cash, David stated flatly. I sat back heavily in my chair, completely stunned. $8 million. My father had bought that land decades ago for pennies on the dollar, hoping the city would eventually expand in that direction. He was right, and Audrey knew it. Audrey saw a massive golden ticket out of her crushing financial ruin. David continued, his voice laced with professional disgust. If she could force you to sign that quitclaim deed for free, she could legally transfer the property into her own failing company name. She would immediately turn around, sign the $8 million contract with the commercial developers, and walk away incredibly rich. She could easily pay off her $250,000 credit card debt. She could pay off the Internal Revenue Service and completely avoid federal prison. And she would still have over $7 million left over in pure profit to finally live the lavish lifestyle she has been faking for the past 5 years. The sheer level of deceit was absolutely breathtaking. Audrey sat at that Thanksgiving table sipping expensive champagne and mocking my cheap clothes, all while actively plotting to steal an $8 million fortune directly from my hands. She and Patricia were willing to send innocent Jasmine to federal prison on completely fabricated felony theft charges just to ensure I signed away my massive inheritance without asking any questions. They thought I was just a stupid broke artist who would cower in fear and hand over the keys to a fortune. They thought they had backed me into an inescapable corner. I looked at David, my mind suddenly perfectly clear. "We are not going to wait for Wednesday," I said, my voice ringing with absolute authority. "Do you have the direct contact information for the commercial developer who made the offer?" David nodded slowly, adjusting his glasses. "I do. The lead acquisition director is currently sitting in a corporate office just 3 blocks away from this building." "Excellent," I replied, standing up from the heavy leather chair. "Call him right now. Tell him the actual legal owner of the land is sitting in your office and is ready to negotiate directly. But tell him the price just went up. If they want that vital highway access, they are going to pay $10 million for it. And I want the closing paperwork finalized and the cash deposited directly into my account by tomorrow morning." David grinned widely, clearly thrilled by the aggressive maneuver. "Consider it done, Natalie. I will have the commercial contracts drafted within the hour." I grabbed my cheap coat and headed for the heavy glass door. I had a massive land deal to close today, but more importantly, I had to get Jasmine out of that toxic house before Jason completely destroyed her. The land deal closed flawlessly. $10 million was wired directly into my secure account by late afternoon. I was officially a multimillionaire twice over, but my mind was entirely focused on Jasmine. I spent the evening setting up a secure trust and organizing the explosive documents David had provided. I was just about to finally go to sleep when my phone rang abruptly. It was almost midnight. The caller ID flashed Jasmine's name. I answered immediately. The sound of violent shivering and choked-back sobs filled my ear. "Natalie, please help me!" Jasmine cried, her teeth audibly chattering. "I am so sorry to call you so late. I do not have anywhere else to go and my phone battery is at 2%. I jumped right out of bed, grabbing my keys. "Where are you?" I demanded, my heart racing with sudden panic. "I am sitting on the concrete curb at the end of our neighborhood block," she whimpered. "What happened?" I asked, sprinting toward my apartment door. "Jason locked me out," she explained, her voice breaking completely. "He came home drunk and left his phone unlocked on the kitchen counter." I saw a string of explicit messages. He has been seeing a young blonde woman for over a year. He is paying the rent for her luxury apartment using my stolen paychecks. When I confronted him about it, he completely lost his mind. He grabbed me by my arms, dragged me to the front door, and physically threw me out onto the porch. He locked the deadbolt and told me if I ever came back, he would tell the police I assaulted him. "I do not even have a coat, Natalie. It is freezing out here." I told her to stay exactly where she was and hung up. I ran down to the underground parking garage of my apartment building. I was no longer driving my rusty 10-year-old sedan. Earlier that week, using my new corporate holding company, I had quietly purchased a brand new, inconspicuous black armored SUV. It looked like a standard high-end family vehicle from the outside, but underneath the sleek dark paint job, it was built like a military tank with bulletproof glass and a reinforced steel frame. It was the absolute perfect vehicle for a woman going to war. I sped through the empty city streets and merged onto the highway, pushing the powerful engine to its absolute limit. Within 30 minutes, I pulled into Jason's upscale suburban neighborhood. I spotted Jasmine immediately. She was huddled under a street lamp, wearing only thin cotton pajamas, hugging her knees tightly to her chest to preserve whatever body heat she had left. I slammed on the brakes, threw the SUV into park, and rushed out into the biting wind. I grabbed a thick, heavy cashmere blanket from the back seat and wrapped it tightly around her trembling shoulders. I guided her into the heated passenger seat of the luxury vehicle. She looked around the pristine leather interior, completely confused by the expensive car, but she was too frozen and exhausted to ask any questions. I blasted the heater and handed her a bottle of water. "You are perfectly safe now," I promised her, pulling away from the dark neighborhood before Jason could look out a window. I did not take her back to my cramped apartment. Instead, I drove us straight into the heart of the city to one of the most exclusive 5-star luxury hotels. I pulled up to the valet, handed him the keys to the armored SUV, and guided Jasmine through the grand marble lobby. At the front desk, I did not use my own name or my personal credit card. I handed the concierge a sleek black corporate card registered to Vanguard Zenith LLC, my anonymous holding company. I booked their top-tier presidential suite for the rest of the week. When we walked into the massive penthouse suite, Jasmine gasped. The room was larger than Jason's entire house, featuring panoramic views of the city skyline, a massive soaking tub, and a plush king-sized bed covered in expensive down comforters. I immediately ordered a massive room service feast for her, complete with hot soup, roasted chicken, and warm tea. Jasmine sat on the edge of the velvet sofa, holding the warm mug of tea with both hands. She looked up at me, the tears finally stopping. "Natalie, how are you paying for all of this?" she asked softly. "Whose car was that? What is actually going on?" I sat down next to her and placed my hand gently over hers. I looked deeply into the eyes of the woman who had driven through a hurricane to give me her last $300. "I am taking care of you now," I said, my voice filled with quiet, absolute certainty. "You do not ever have to go back to that toxic house. You do not ever have to let Jason control you again. I want you to eat a hot meal, take a warm bath, and sleep in that massive bed. Do not worry about the money. Just rest tonight. Because tomorrow you are going to put on a beautiful dress, and you are going to watch them lose absolutely everything." Wednesday morning arrived with a bright, cold sunlight pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our luxury penthouse suite. I woke up feeling a profound sense of absolute clarity and purpose. Jasmine was already awake and sitting at the grand dining table, finishing a plate of fresh fruit from the room service cart. She had slept deeply for the first time in years. The dark, exhausted circles under her eyes were completely gone, replaced by a calm and steady energy. I had arranged for a high-end personal stylist to visit the hotel suite early that morning. I told the stylist to bring a selection of powerful, elegant clothes, and I told Jasmine to pick whatever made her feel completely unstoppable. She chose a stunning emerald green tailored dress that complemented her dark skin perfectly, paired with a sleek black wool coat and elegant black heels. She looked absolutely breathtaking. It was a total physical transformation from the shivering, broken woman wearing thin cotton pajamas on the side of the road just 2 nights prior. We left the hotel and took my armored SUV downtown. Audrey rented her corporate office space in a flashy, modern high-rise building right in the center of the financial district. It was a premium co-working space designed specifically to make desperate business owners look incredibly successful to outside investors. We walked through the giant glass revolving doors, crossed the polished marble lobby, and took the express elevator up to the 20th floor. I could feel Jasmine tense up slightly as the floor numbers ticked higher, but I grabbed her hand and gave it a firm, reassuring squeeze. We walked down a long carpeted hallway and stepped into Audrey's rented glass-walled conference room. My mother, Patricia, was already sitting at the head of the heavy oak table, sipping an artisanal coffee from a porcelain cup. Audrey was sitting right next to her, eagerly tapping her long manicured nails against the smooth tabletop. Jason was leaning casually against the large window overlooking the city street, wearing a sharp, tailored suit, looking completely arrogant, like he owned the entire building. The exact moment we walked through the glass door, the smug, expectant expressions on their faces instantly shifted. Jason's jaw visibly tightened when his eyes landed on his wife. He had physically thrown her out into the freezing cold 2 nights ago, fully expecting her to come crawling back the next morning, begging for his forgiveness. Instead, she was standing tall, looking far more radiant and expensive than Audrey and Patricia combined. "Where the hell have you been?" Jason snapped, taking a threatening step away from the window. "I locked you out to teach you a lesson about respect, not so you could go running to my broke sister to cry about it. And what exactly are you wearing?" He looked Jasmine up and down with deep, obvious disdain, then turned his vicious glare entirely on me. "You are actually so incredibly pathetic, Natalie. Did you spend your entire monthly rent money just to dress my wife up in a fancy department store dress? You probably maxed out your only sad little credit card just to make a grand dramatic entrance. Let me guess, you are both going to get evicted next week because you wanted to play dress up today. Jasmine did not flinch. She just stared right back at him with an expression of pure cold indifference, which only seemed to infuriate him even more. Patricia loudly cleared her throat, clearly highly annoyed by the sudden distraction. She did not care about Jasmine's whereabouts or Jason's marital problems. She only cared about securing the massive financial asset for her golden child. Enough of this ridiculous family drama, Patricia commanded, sharply waving her hand to silence Jason. She reached into her expensive leather designer handbag and pulled out the thick manila folder containing the quitclaim deed. She slapped the heavy legal document down onto the glass table right in front of an empty leather chair. She then pulled out the same heavy gold pen from Thanksgiving dinner and placed it directly on top of the signature line. Audrey leaned forward in her chair, her eyes locked hungrily on the printed pages. "We gave you your precious 72 hours, Natalie. My corporate lawyers are standing by waiting for the finalized paperwork. I have a very busy schedule today, and I cannot spend all afternoon dealing with your petty delays." Patricia pointed a sharp, perfectly manicured finger at the empty chair across the table. "Sit down right now, pick up the pen, and sign the deed, Natalie. Stop wasting our time. If you hesitate for even one single second, I am pulling out my cell phone and calling the police precinct to report Jasmine for stealing my diamond brooch. Jason will gladly corroborate my story as a key eyewitness. Do not test my patience today." I slowly pulled out the leather chair and sat down at the heavy glass table. I looked down at the thick manila folder and the heavy gold pen resting on top of the signature line. My mother and my brother watched me with predatory anticipation. I reached out and let my fingers wrap around the cool metal of the pen. Audrey leaned in closer, a triumphant smirk stretching across her glossy lips. She thought she had completely won. She thought I was broken. I held the pen over the paper for a long moment, letting the silence stretch out in the room. Then I casually set the pen back down on the glass tabletop. It made a sharp clinking sound that shattered the quiet. "Before I sign away my entire inheritance, Audrey, I have one very quick legal question," I said, keeping my voice perfectly calm and devoid of any fear. "What is the exact registered name of the limited liability company that is purchasing this property? I just want to make sure the legal paperwork is completely accurate." Audrey rolled her eyes and sighed loudly, clearly annoyed by the delay. "It is registered under my primary corporate holding group. You do not need to worry about the legal specifics, Natalie. My expensive attorneys have already verified everything. Just sign the paper so we can all leave." I leaned back in my leather chair and crossed my arms. "Is that the same primary corporate holding group that is currently under a severe federal audit by the Internal Revenue Service?" I asked loudly. "Or is it one of the shell companies you created to hide your massive fraudulent business losses?" Audrey's jaw practically unhinged. The triumphant smirk instantly vanished from her face, completely replaced by a look of sheer, terrifying shock. The blood drained entirely from her cheeks, leaving her pale and shaking. Patricia frowned, looking back and forth between the two of us in heavy confusion. "What are you talking about?" Patricia demanded sharply. "Audrey is a highly successful real estate broker. Do not dare accuse your sister of federal tax fraud." I ignored my mother completely and reached into my sleek designer handbag. I pulled out the glossy architectural blueprint and the printed chain of emails my attorney had given me. I slapped the stack of documents directly onto the glass table, right on top of Audrey's precious quitclaim deed. "You are not a successful broker, Audrey," I said, my voice echoing off the glass walls of the conference room. "You have not sold a single house in over a year. You are drowning in $250,000 of unsecured credit card debt. Your luxury SUV is 3 months behind on payments and has an active repossession order on it. You desperately needed my 50 acres of rural dirt to save yourself from going to federal prison for tax evasion." Jason scoffed loudly from his spot by the window. You are completely delusional, Natalie. Why would a piece of barren wasteland save her from anything? I slid the printed emails across the table toward him. Because it is no longer barren wasteland, Jason. The state government just approved a multi-billion-dollar tech hub development right next to my property. The commercial developers need my land to build their primary highway access road. 3 months ago, they formally approached Audrey, assuming she legally represented the estate. I turned my gaze back to my hyperventilating sister. They offered you $8 million in pure cash for my property, Audrey. You orchestrated this entire elaborate scam just to steal an $8 million buyout directly out of my hands. You are going to use my money to pay off your repo man, pay off the IRS, and keep the rest to fund your fake glamorous lifestyle. You and Mom were perfectly willing to frame an innocent woman for a felony crime and send Jasmine to prison just to secure your stolen payday. Patricia stared at the emails in absolute disbelief. $8 million, she whispered faintly, her eyes darting toward Audrey. Audrey, is this true? Were you going to hide an $8 million transaction from me while I helped you threaten Jasmine? Patricia was not angry about the crime. She was angry she was being cut out of the massive profit. But there is a major problem with your brilliant little plan, Audrey. I continued, leaning forward and resting my hands on the glass table. I did not spend the last 72 hours crying at a free legal aid clinic. I hired a ruthless corporate wealth manager. And yesterday morning, I personally called the lead acquisition director of the commercial development firm. I informed him that I was the sole legal owner and that I was fully prepared to walk away from the deal entirely unless they increased their offer. Audrey's eyes widened in absolute horror. What did you do? She gasped, her voice cracking. I bypassed you completely, I said with a cold, satisfied smile. I sold the land directly to them yesterday afternoon, but I did not sell it for $8 million. I sold it for $10 million. The cash has already been wired into my secure accounts. You get absolutely nothing. A blood-curdling scream erupted from Audrey's throat. She grabbed the edges of her hair and shrieked in pure, panicked agony. No, she wailed violently, sweeping her arms across the table, knocking her porcelain coffee cup onto the floor where it shattered into a dozen pieces. You ruined everything. They are going to arrest me. They are going to take my apartment and my car and put me in a federal prison. You stole my money. You destroyed my entire life. Audrey collapsed over the table, sobbing hysterically into her arms. The polished and perfect golden child was completely gone. I sat perfectly still, watching my sister unravel. It is not your money, Audrey, I replied smoothly. It never was. Audrey continued to sob uncontrollably, her tears smearing her expensive makeup across the pristine glass table. For years, she had been the untouchable golden child, the perfect daughter who could do absolutely no wrong. But the second the illusion of her wealth shattered the true nature of our family dynamic, instantly took over. There was no loyalty in this room, only greed and self-preservation. Jason, who had been leaning casually against the window, immediately recognized that Audrey's ship was rapidly sinking. Instead of rushing over to comfort his devastated sister, he quickly pushed himself off the glass and practically sprinted to the opposite side of the table to stand right behind Patricia's chair. He smoothly placed his hands on his mother's shoulders, putting on a sickeningly sweet mask of protective concern. Mom, you need to distance yourself from Audrey immediately, Jason commanded, his voice dropping into a serious, authoritative register. If she is actively under a federal investigation for severe tax fraud, the IRS is going to freeze every single one of her bank accounts. They will seize her assets, her car, and her apartment. If you give her even a single dollar to help her out, or if you maintain any financial ties with her businesses, the federal government might decide to audit your accounts next. She is a massive financial liability, and she could drag your entire reputation down into the mud with her. Patricia stiffened in her chair. The sheer terror of losing her country club status and having federal agents knocking on her manicured front door completely overrode any maternal instinct she might have possessed. She looked down at her weeping daughter with absolute disgust, as if Audrey were a diseased animal that had wandered into a pristine mansion. Jason is absolutely right, Patricia stated coldly, pulling her designer handbag closer to her chest. Audrey, I will not have my good name dragged through the federal court system because of your sloppy, illegal mistakes. Do not expect me to pay for your expensive criminal defense lawyers. You made this bed and now you can lie in it completely by yourself. Audrey gasped, looking up at her mother with wide, betrayed eyes. Mom, please, you cannot just abandon me, she begged, her voice completely hoarse. But Patricia simply turned her head away, completely cutting Audrey out of her life in the blink of an eye. Jason smiled smugly. With Audrey entirely out of the picture, he was now the undisputed sole heir to Patricia's massive suburban estate and her heavily funded retirement accounts. He puffed out his chest, adjusting the lapels of his sharp-tailored suit, feeling completely invincible. He then turned his vicious, arrogant glare back across the table toward me. He pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at my face. You think you are so incredibly smart? Do you not, Natalie? He sneered, taking a slow, intimidating step forward. You think stumbling into a $10 million land deal suddenly makes you a financial genius? Let me tell you a harsh reality. $10 million is absolute child's play compared to the real generational wealth in this family. You just got incredibly lucky selling a patch of dirt, but underneath that cheap jacket you are still the exact same pathetic broke trash you have always been. Jason laughed, a cruel, echoing sound that bounced off the glass walls of the conference room. You might have ruined Audrey's little scam, but you will never touch the real money. Mom's suburban house is worth millions. Her investment portfolios are massive, and as the sole legal executor of her living trust, I have total, absolute control over every single asset she owns. The second she passes away, I am inheriting everything. You will be completely locked out forever. He then shifted his hateful gaze over to Jasmine, who was sitting perfectly upright beside me in her stunning emerald green dress. And as for you, Jason spat, his voice dripping with pure venom, you can stay with my pathetic sister, because when I file for divorce and take my multi-million-dollar inheritance, I am going to make sure my high-priced lawyers leave you completely destitute. You will not get a single dime of my money. You can both rot in the gutter together. I sat perfectly still, absorbing his arrogant tirade, without showing a single ounce of emotion. I let him talk. I let him build himself up to the absolute highest pedestal he could possibly reach. Because the higher he climbed, the more devastating the impact of his fall was going to be. I slowly turned my gaze away from Audrey's trembling shoulders and locked my eyes directly onto my brother's incredibly smug face. A dark, icy calm washed over my entire body. The real trap was finally ready to spring. Are you entirely sure about that, Jason? I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet whisper that instantly commanded the entire room. Because a legal executor is supposed to protect a trust, not systematically drain it to cover massive illegal gambling debts. I did not break eye contact with my brother as I reached back into my heavy designer handbag. I grabbed the second thick black binder, the one my corporate wealth manager David had prepared specifically for this exact moment. I lifted it high and slammed it down flat onto the center of the glass table. The heavy thud echoed sharply, making both Jason and Patricia jump in their seats. Are you completely sure about inheriting those millions, Jason? I asked, leaning forward so my face was only inches from his. Because according to these certified bank records and the forensic accountants I hired, there are absolutely no millions left for you to inherit. You already stole them all. Patricia frowned deeply, her manicured hands fluttering nervously over her silk blouse. What on earth are you talking about now, Natalie? She demanded, her voice wavering slightly as the panic began to set in. Jason is a highly successful regional sales manager. He is a financial genius. He manages my entire estate portfolio perfectly. He would never do anything to jeopardize our family wealth. I opened the thick binder, and flipped directly to the brightly colored financial charts, showing the massive catastrophic drops in his net worth. Your perfect golden boy lost his entire life savings 3 years ago, Mom, I announced loudly, making sure every single word cut through the silent room. He does not invest in safe mutual funds. He has a severe high-stakes gambling addiction. He blew all of his money on highly volatile cryptocurrency markets and reckless options trading. Jason suddenly looked as though all the air had been violently sucked right out of his lungs. His confident, arrogant posture completely collapsed. He took a stumbling step backward, his eyes darting frantically toward the open door as if he were calculating how fast he could run away. "Shut your mouth, Natalie," he hissed, a thick bead of sweat suddenly forming on his forehead. "You do not know anything about the complex stock market. You are completely fabricating this to ruin me." I ignored his pathetic stammering and pulled out the heavy legal mortgage documents featuring Patricia's forged signatures. I slid them across the smooth glass directly toward my mother. "Then explain these secured loan agreements, Jason. Because when you ran out of your own money to gamble with, you decided to start using Mom's pristine suburban estate as your own personal casino chip." Patricia picked up the documents with violently shaking hands. She squinted at the complex legal jargon, her eyes scanning the bold numbers at the top of the page. "What is this, Jason?" she whispered, the color draining completely from her face. "Why is there a $600,000 second mortgage on my house? I never agreed to this. I never signed these papers. We own that house free and clear." I pointed to the bottom of the page. "He forged your signature, Mom. He used his privileged legal position as the trusted executor of your living trust to completely bypass your consent. He secretly took out that massive mortgage, and then he took out another $200,000 personal line of credit, using your name as the primary financial guarantor. He has been committing federal wire fraud and felony forgery for years, right under your nose." Patricia dropped the papers onto the table as if they were physically burning her hands. She turned slowly to look at her favorite son. The golden boy who could do absolutely no wrong was now visibly trembling, his expensive tailored suit suddenly looking completely ridiculous on his shrinking frame. Jasmine sat quietly beside me, her posture perfectly straight, watching the cruel man who had tormented her finally face his own inescapable destruction. "Mom, listen to me," Jason pleaded, his voice cracking pitifully. "It was just a temporary dip in the market. The crypto algorithms were supposed to rebound. I was going to make it all back and pay off the loans before you ever even noticed. I was just trying to multiply our family wealth so we could live even better." "You forged my name," Patricia screamed, her voice cracking in pure absolute horror. "You put my beautiful home up as collateral for an internet gambling addiction. How are we going to pay this massive debt back, Jason? How much is the monthly payment on an $800,000 loan? He is not paying it back." "Mom," I interrupted coldly, leaning back in my leather chair, "because he is already severely defaulting on the payments. The bank sent a final legal notice of intent to foreclose just last week. Jason intercepted your certified mail so you would not see it. He is completely bankrupt, and because of his reckless criminal actions, you are completely bankrupt too." Patricia's chest heaved as she gasped for air. Her eyes were wide with pure, unadulterated terror. The luxurious country club life she valued more than her own children was entirely gone. She realized in that exact moment that her prized house, her wealthy status, and her entire fake identity had been completely destroyed by the one child she had actually loved. The arrogant facade Jason wore like armor had shattered into a million irreparable pieces right in front of her eyes. He was nothing but a pathetic common thief. Jason frantically reached out to touch Patricia's arm, desperately trying to salvage whatever tiny fragment of his golden boy status remained. "Mom, please look at me," he begged, his voice high-pitched and whining. "I can fix this. I just need a little bit more time and a small cash injection to beat the margin calls. I know the market is going to turn around." Patricia violently yanked her arm away from him. as if his touch was physically burning her skin. "Do not ever touch me again," she hissed, her eyes completely wide with pure, unfiltered hatred. "You stole my beautiful home. You stole my entire life. I have absolutely nothing left because of you." She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking as the devastating reality of her impending homelessness finally crushed her. I watched the pathetic scene unfold with absolute zero sympathy. But I was not entirely finished with my brother yet. The destruction of his fake wealth was only the first part of his punishment. Now it was time to extract the exact price for his cruelty toward the only innocent person in this room. I turned my attention back to Jason. He was standing there breathing heavily, looking like a cornered rat trapped in a sinking ship. "Jason, sit back down," I commanded sharply. The harsh authority in my voice made him instinctively flinch. "I am not done with you yet." I reached into my designer bag one last time and pulled out a thick stack of legal papers bound by a heavy blue cover. I slapped it down onto the glass table and pushed it directly across the smooth surface until it stopped right in front of him. "What is this now?" he whispered hoarsely, staring at the blue folder like it was a live explosive device. "That is a finalized divorce petition," I stated clearly, gesturing toward Jasmine, who sat beside me, radiating quiet strength. "I had the absolute most ruthless family law attorney in the city draft it yesterday afternoon. It outlines the complete and total dissolution of your marriage." Jason let out a shaky breath, attempting to muster a tiny fraction of his previous arrogance. "You think I care about a divorce right now? Fine. Let her leave. I do not have any money anyway, so she is not getting a single dime from me." I smiled a cold, calculating smile. "Oh, but she is getting everything, Jason. If you open that folder and read the specific terms, you will see exactly what you are agreeing to. You are going to immediately liquidate that offshore shell account in the Cayman Islands. You are going to return 100% of Jasmine's stolen nursing wages directly to her personal bank account. Furthermore, you are agreeing to pay her maximum permanent alimony, and you are surrendering any and all claims to her future income. You are walking away with absolutely nothing." Jason's face twisted in pure rage. He slammed his fist onto the table, rattling the shattered pieces of Audrey's broken coffee cup. "I am not signing that ridiculous garbage," he yelled, spittle flying from his lips. "You cannot force me to agree to those insane terms. Any judge in the state would throw that petition right out the window. I will fight her in court for years. I will drag this out until she is completely bankrupt and begging me to stop." I slowly leaned forward, locking my eyes directly onto his panicked face. "If you refuse to sign those papers right this exact second, or if you even attempt to fight this in court, I will not hesitate to make one simple phone call." I warned, my voice dropping to a deadly serious whisper. I reached into the folder and pulled out a stack of glossy, 8 by 10 photographs. I fanned them out across the glass table. They were high-resolution surveillance pictures taken by my private investigator. They clearly showed Jason walking into a luxury apartment building arm in arm with his young blonde mistress. The next photo showed a printed ledger, proving Jason was using Jasmine's stolen paychecks to pay the rent for that exact apartment. "If you fight this divorce," I continued relentlessly, "I will hand these photographs directly to the divorce judge to prove severe marital misconduct. But far more importantly, I will take the concrete forensic evidence of your massive wire fraud, your illegal offshore accounts, and the forged signatures on Mom's heavily defaulted mortgages, and I will hand-deliver them straight to the Federal Bureau of Investigation." Jason stared at the photographs, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. He looked completely paralyzed by the sheer volume of evidence stacked against him. "You are looking at 20 years in a federal penitentiary for bank fraud alone," I reminded him cheerfully. "The FBI does not care about your pathetic excuses or your gambling addiction. They will lock you in a concrete cell and throw away the key. You have exactly 10 seconds to make a choice. Sign the paper and give Jasmine her entire life back, or walk out of this room and wait for the federal agents to kick your door down tonight." The sheer, absolute terror in Jason's eyes was deeply satisfying. The arrogant, controlling monster who had terrorized his wife and bragged about canceling her car insurance was completely gone. He was nothing but a terrified coward, staring directly into the abyss of his own making. He looked at Audrey, who was still sobbing hysterically over her lost millions. He looked at Patricia, who refused to even acknowledge his existence. There was absolutely no one left to save him. He was completely alone. With a violently shaking hand, Jason slowly reached out and picked up the heavy gold pen resting on the table. It was the exact same pen Audrey had tried to use to steal my inheritance just 30 minutes ago. He uncapped it, his fingers trembling so badly he could barely hold the metal barrel steady. He pressed the tip to the signature line on the final page of the divorce petition. He signed his name, the ink scratching messily across the thick paper. He pushed the document back across the table, his head hanging low in absolute defeat. Jasmine watched him do it, her posture perfect, her expression completely unbothered. She was finally free. I carefully picked up the signed divorce petition from the glass table, ensuring the wet ink did not smear, and slipped it safely back into the secure pocket of my designer bag. Jasmine let out a slow, steady exhale next to me, the heavy, invisible chains of her abusive marriage finally shattering onto the floor. She did not even look at Jason. He was no longer a threat. He was just a pathetic, broken man staring blankly at his own hands. The sound of frantic, shallow breathing suddenly drew my attention back to the head of the oak table. Patricia was gripping the armrests of her leather chair so tightly her knuckles had turned completely white. Her chest heaved dramatically as she hyperventilated, struggling to process the absolute destruction of her perfect golden children. The flawless illusion she had spent decades meticulously building had just been entirely dismantled in less than 20 minutes. Instead of directing her fury at the son who had forged her signature or the daughter who had committed federal tax fraud, Patricia did what she had always done my entire life. She looked for a scapegoat. She locked her wild, furious eyes directly onto me. "You vicious little snake!" Patricia hissed, her voice trembling with a toxic mixture of panic and pure hatred. She abruptly pushed her chair back and stood up, trying desperately to regain some fraction of her lost matriarchal authority. "You orchestrated all of this just to humiliate us. You hired those despicable investigators to dig up dirt and ruin your own flesh and blood. You completely destroyed this family today, Natalie." I sat perfectly still, observing her absolute delusion. "I did not force Jason to gamble away his money, Mom," I replied calmly. "And I did not force Audrey to lie to the Internal Revenue Service. They destroyed themselves. I simply turned on the lights so everyone could finally see the cockroaches scurrying across the floor." "Shut your mouth!" Patricia shrieked, slamming her manicured hands flat against the glass tabletop. "I will not sit here and listen to a pathetic, ungrateful brat lecture me about morality. You have always been jealous of your sister and brother. You have always hated our success because you are a miserable failure who draws pictures for pennies. You came in here today trying to act like some powerful corporate executive just because you got lucky selling a piece of dirt. But you are nothing." Patricia reached for her expensive designer handbag, her hands shaking so violently she could barely grasp the leather straps. She pulled the bag over her shoulder and glared down at me with absolute venom. "Get out of my sight," she commanded, pointing a trembling finger toward the glass conference room door. "You are officially dead to me. Do not ever call my phone again. Do not ever show your face at my house again." She took a deep, ragged breath, trying to physically smooth out the wrinkles in her expensive silk blouse, desperate to wrap herself back up in her wealthy country club persona. "I am leaving right now," Patricia announced proudly, lifting her chin to look down her nose at me. "I am driving straight to my primary bank. I am going to sit down personally with the branch president. We play golf together every single weekend, and he will gladly help me fix this temporary mess." She looked over at Jason, who was still slumped in his chair. "I am going to completely remortgage my beautiful suburban estate," she declared, her voice ringing with desperate false confidence. I will pull out enough equity to pay off these ridiculous hidden loans you took out, Jason. Then I am going to hire the best white-collar defense attorneys in the city to protect Audrey from the federal government. We are going to fix this because we are a respectable, wealthy family. Patricia turned her vicious glare back to me one final time, her lips curling into a cruel, triumphant sneer. And as for you, Natalie, you are completely cut off from this family forever. I am calling my estate lawyer the second I leave the bank. I am legally writing you out of my living trust. You will not inherit my jewelry, you will not inherit my investment portfolios, and you will absolutely never step foot inside my multi-million-dollar house ever again. You will never get a single dime from me. I listened to her entire frantic speech without interrupting. I let her scream, I let her threaten, and I let her desperately cling to the illusion of her grand suburban castle. She genuinely believed she still held the ultimate financial power over me. She thought threatening to disinherit me was the absolute ultimate punishment. It was the exact perfect moment to deliver the final killing blow. I let the silence hang in the air for just a moment before a sound bubbled up from deep inside my chest. It started as a low chuckle and quickly erupted into a full loud burst of genuine laughter. The sound bounced off the glass walls of the conference room, sharp and completely unapologetic. Patricia froze her hand, still clutching the strap of her designer bag. Her eyes narrowed in utter confusion and deep offense. She was fully expecting me to cry to beg for her forgiveness, or to panic over being cut out of her precious living trust. My laughter completely shattered her grand dramatic exit. "What on earth is so funny?" Patricia demanded, her voice shrill and trembling with rage. "I just disinherited you. You are getting absolutely nothing. Stop laughing like a lunatic and get out of my sight." I slowly stopped laughing, wiping a stray tear of pure amusement from the corner of my eye. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the glass table, and looked directly into my mother's furious eyes. "You cannot remortgage the suburban house, Mother," I said, my voice dropping back down to a cold, deadly whisper. "You cannot pull out any equity to save Jason, and you cannot hire expensive lawyers for Audrey using that property." Patricia scoffed, rolling her eyes. "And why exactly is that?" she snapped defensively. "Because you do not own it anymore," I stated flatly. Patricia stared at me for a long, heavy second before letting out a dismissive scoff. "You really are completely delusional, Natalie. My name is on the original deed. I have lived in that house for over 30 years. I own it free and clear, regardless of whatever fraudulent loans your brother tried to attach to it. I will simply have my bank president clear the fraudulent charges." I did not bother arguing with her. Instead, I simply raised my hand and signaled toward the heavy glass door of the conference room. Right on cue, the door swung open. David Harrison, my ruthless corporate wealth management attorney, stepped confidently into the room. He was wearing a meticulously tailored charcoal suit and carried a slim leather briefcase. He walked with the calm, authoritative presence of a man who was about to deliver a legal execution. Patricia took a step back, startled by the sudden intrusion. "Who are you?" she demanded, clutching her bag tighter. "This is a private family meeting. You need to leave immediately." David ignored her completely. He walked straight over to the glass table and opened his leather briefcase. He pulled out a thick stack of official legal documents, each one bearing the heavy embossed seal of the county clerk and the primary mortgage lender. He placed the stack directly in the center of the table, right next to Jason's signed divorce petition. "My name is David Harrison," he introduced himself smoothly, his voice projecting easily across the room. "I represent the legal and financial interests of your daughter, Natalie. And unfortunately for you, Patricia, she is entirely correct. You no longer own the estate you currently reside in." Patricia looked down at the documents, her eyes wide with mounting panic. "What is this?" she whispered. "This is an official notice of foreclosure and a finalized transfer of deed," David explained, tapping a manicured finger against the top page. Due to the massive secondary mortgages that Jason secured against the property, the accounts went into severe default over 4 months ago. The bank sent multiple certified notices of intent to foreclose to your primary residence. Patricia slowly turned her head to look at Jason. Did they send notices? She asked, her voice cracking. Jason could not even meet her gaze. He stared down at his expensive leather shoes and gave a single pathetic nod. He intercepted every single letter David confirmed coldly. Because the loans were entirely unpaid and the legal notices were completely ignored, the primary lender aggressively expedited the foreclosure process. They legally seized the property last week. No! Patricia gasped, stepping backward until her legs hit a chair, forcing her to sit down heavily. That cannot be right. I would have known. Someone would have come to the house. The legal notices were the warning, David replied without a single ounce of pity. Yesterday morning, your multi-million-dollar suburban estate was placed on the county auction block. The bank needed to liquidate the asset immediately to recover the heavily defaulted loans Jason stole. Patricia started hyperventilating again, her hands flying up to grasp her expensive pearl necklace. Then I will buy it back, she cried out desperately. I will liquidate my retirement accounts. I will call my bank president right now, and we will match whatever the winning bid was. Who bought my house? Tell me who bought it so I can negotiate with them directly. David adjusted his expensive glasses and looked down at her with professional detachment. The property is no longer open for negotiation or bidding. The auction concluded yesterday afternoon. The house was purchased entirely in cash, far above the asking price, by an anonymous corporate holding company. Patricia blinked rapidly, her brain struggling to process the devastating finality of his words. An anonymous holding company, she repeated blankly. What is the name of the company? David pointed to the bold black letters printed across the finalized transfer of deed. The entity that legally owns your home, and the entity that is officially taking possession of the property, is called Vanguard Zenith, LLC. Patricia stared at the paperwork, her hands trembling so violently she could not even pick up the pages. She looked completely broken. A queen who had just watched her entire castle burn to the ground. She pulled out her cell phone, her fingers fumbling over the screen, desperately preparing to call her wealthy connections to wage war against this unknown, faceless corporation. Vanguard Zenith, LLC, she muttered frantically. I will sue them. I will drag them into court for buying stolen property. Who do they think they are? I sat back in my leather chair, watching her panic with a deep sense of absolute satisfaction. The final piece of the trap was perfectly set. Audrey suddenly lifted her head from her arms. Her makeup was completely smeared across her cheeks, and her eyes were bloodshot from her hysterical sobbing. Who is Vanguard Zenith? She demanded, her voice cracking as she desperately grasped for any remaining lifeline. Is it some massive hedge fund? A foreign investment group? Mom, if it is a corporate buyer, they only care about profit margins. We can just offer them 10% above what they paid at the auction. We can finance it somehow. We can beg them to sell the house back to us. I watched Audrey frantically attempt to negotiate a completely imaginary deal with a faceless corporate ghost. Her desperation was almost tragic, but I felt absolutely no pity for the woman who had happily tried to send Jasmine to federal prison just moments ago. I slowly placed my hands flat against the cool glass of the conference table. I leaned forward, commanding the absolute attention of every single person in the room. You do not need to negotiate with a faceless corporation, Audrey, I said, my voice slicing through her frantic rambling like a sharpened blade. And you certainly do not need to track down a foreign investment group to beg for your house back. Audrey blinked, wiping a dirty streak of tears from her cheek. What are you talking about? How do you know what they want? I did not blink. I kept my gaze locked directly onto my sister's terrified eyes. Because it is me, I stated plainly, letting the absolute weight of those 3 simple words hang heavily in the cold air. I am Vanguard Zenith, LLC. The entire room went completely dead silent. The sound of Patricia's hyperventilating stopped instantly. Jason's constant nervous shifting ceased entirely. Even the faint hum of the building air conditioning suddenly felt deafening. They all stared at me as if I had just spoken to them in a completely foreign language. Patricia was the first one to finally break the suffocating silence. Do not be ridiculous, Natalie, she scoffed, though her voice lacked any real conviction. You do not have the money to buy an estate in cash at a county foreclosure auction. You are a broke freelance artist. You do not even have $900 for a basic medical emergency. I reached into my designer handbag one last time. I pulled out a single crisp piece of heavy financial stationery. It was an official certified bank statement printed exactly 1 hour before this meeting began. I slapped it down onto the glass table and pushed it directly into the center, right where Patricia, Jason, and Audrey could all clearly see it. Take a very close look, Mom, I commanded. Patricia leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she focused on the printed numbers. Jason and Audrey immediately crowded around the document, their eyes widening in pure absolute disbelief. Printed boldly at the bottom of the page, right next to the name, Vanguard Zenith, LLC, was a verified cash balance of exactly $64 million. $64 million? Jason whispered out loud, his voice entirely hollow. He looked like he was about to physically vomit, right there on the glass table. Where did you get $64 million? I leaned back in my chair, feeling a profound sense of total victory. 10 million of that is from the commercial land deal I closed yesterday afternoon, I explained cheerfully, glancing directly at Audrey. The exact same land you arrogantly tried to steal from me for a massive discount. I sold it right out from under you. Audrey let out a choked, agonizing gasp, realizing her own greed had literally handed me a $10 million fortune. And the other $54 million, I continued turning my attention back to Patricia, is the after-tax cash payout from the winning Powerball ticket I purchased over a month ago. I knew I had won the lottery the exact same night I called you from the emergency room. I did not need surgery, Mom. I was perfectly healthy. I just needed to know if my family would help me when I was at my absolute lowest. Patricia stared at me, her mouth hanging open in completely mute shock. You told me my poverty was a choice, I reminded her, throwing her own cruel words right back into her face. You told me to figure it out because I was just a disgusting financial burden. So I did exactly what you asked. I figured it out. I hired the best corporate lawyers in Manhattan. I bought your defaulted debt. And I bought the very roof over your head. The abusers were completely paralyzed. The grand realization finally washed over them in a crushing tidal wave. The daughter they had treated like absolute garbage for 3 decades, the sister they had relentlessly mocked and plotted to destroy, was now a multimillionaire. I was the wealthiest person in our entire family history, and I was the one holding the absolute legal power to destroy their lives forever. I watched the exact moment their entire reality fractured. They had pushed me into the dirt for years, but the dirt had just buried them alive. I stood up slowly from my leather chair, letting the sheer, undeniable power of my new position settle heavily over the glass conference room. I looked directly at Patricia and Jason, who were both staring at the printed bank statement, as if it were a loaded weapon. The undeniable reality of my $64 million fortune was suffocating them. Since I am the sole legal owner of the estate you currently occupy, Patricia, I began, my voice ringing with absolute authority that echoed off the glass walls. I am giving you official verbal and written notice of eviction right here and right now. You and Jason have exactly 48 hours to pack your personal belongings, your clothes, and whatever cheap items you actually own, and completely vacate my property. David Harrison stepped forward and dropped a formal legal eviction notice right next to the bank statement. David will be waiting outside the house on Friday at exactly 12 noon with a team of armed private security contractors. I continued outlining the strict parameters of their ruin. You will hand over every single set of house keys, the security alarm codes, and the garage remotes. And let me make this incredibly clear to both of you. If you attempt to strip that house out of pure spite, if you take a single crystal chandelier, if you unscrew a single fixture from the walls, if you try to take the expensive appliances, or if you intentionally damage my property in any way whatsoever, I will not hesitate for a second. I will have both of you immediately arrested and heavily charged with felony vandalism and the destruction of private property. Jason slumped forward until his forehead hit the cool glass of the conference table. He buried his face in his trembling hands. The arrogant man who had endlessly mocked my cheap clothes, the monster who had bragged about canceling his wife's car insurance to keep her trapped, was now completely homeless and facing imminent federal prison time. He did not say a single word. He was entirely and utterly broken. But Patricia could not accept the harsh reality of her total defeat. The grand matriarch who valued her prestigious country club status far above her own flesh and blood completely snapped under the crushing weight of her failure. She slid off her expensive leather chair, her legs giving out completely, and literally fell to her knees, right on the carpeted floor of the rented conference room. "Natalie, please," Patricia wailed loudly, her voice cracking in agony as heavy tears ruined her expensive makeup and streamed down her face. She crawled a few inches forward across the floor, desperately reaching out with trembling hands to grab the hem of my cheap denim jacket. "Please, do not do this to me. I am your mother. You cannot throw me out onto the cold street. Where will I go? I have absolutely no money left. Jason completely ruined my credit score. I will have to live in a homeless shelter." She sobbed hysterically, her carefully crafted wealthy persona melting away completely into pathetic groveling desperation. Audrey watched from the other side of the table in completely mute horror, paralyzed by the sight of her arrogant mother begging on her hands and knees. "I am so incredibly sorry for everything I said today," Patricia begged, looking up at me with wild, pleading eyes. "I was just stressed out. I did not mean any of those cruel, hateful things I said to you. I have always loved you, Natalie. You are my beautiful, intelligent daughter. I was just trying to push you to be successful through tough love. Please, I am begging you on my knees, let me stay in the house. I will pay you rent. I will clean the floors. I will do whatever you want. Just do not take my beautiful home away from me." I looked down at the weeping woman kneeling pathetically at my feet. For 33 years, I had desperately craved her maternal love and her approval. I had cried myself to sleep as a teenager, wishing she would just look at me with the same intense pride she always reserved for Audrey and Jason. But standing there right now, watching her grovel and humiliate herself for a piece of suburban real estate, I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, no pity. There was just a cold, empty void where my mother used to be. I slowly took a deliberate step back, forcing her trembling fingers to let go of my jacket. I did not bend down to help her stand up. I did not offer her a comforting tissue. "You did not use tough love," I stated, my voice completely devoid of any human emotion. "You are just a cruel, selfish woman who only valued people based entirely on their bank accounts. You happily watched my sister try to steal my inheritance today. You gladly conspired to frame Jasmine for a felony crime just to get your greedy hands on my money. You did not love me 5 minutes ago when you proudly and legally disinherited me. You only love the $64 million printed on that piece of paper." Patricia continued to weep loudly, her hands covering her face as she rocked back and forth on the floor in absolute despair. "Please, Natalie, I am begging you. I have nothing." I leaned down just slightly, ensuring my final words would be permanently etched into her memory forever. I used the exact same cold, dismissive tone she had used on me when I called her from the hospital emergency room, begging for my life. "Your poverty is a choice, Mother," I whispered coldly. "Figure it out." Patricia collapsed entirely onto the carpeted floor. She buried her face in her hands and let out a long, agonizing wail. She was completely broken. Seeing her mother reduced to a sobbing mess on the floor finally broke through Audrey's sheer shock. Audrey suddenly realized that her powerful, wealthy mother could no longer save her. Patricia had no money, no house, and no influence left. Audrey was completely on her own against the terrifying weight of the federal government. She scrambled out of her chair and rushed around the glass table, practically throwing herself at me. "Natalie, you have to help me!" Audrey screamed, her voice shrill and panicked. She reached out, trying to grab my hands, but I smoothly pulled them away and crossed my arms over my chest. I need a loan, Audrey begged frantically. Just a small loan. $2 million. That is absolutely nothing to you now. You have 64 million. 2 million will pay off the Internal Revenue Service and keep me out of federal prison. I will pay you back every single penny with interest. I will work for you. I will do whatever you want. Just please do not let them lock me in a cage. I cannot survive in prison. I am begging you to save my life. I looked at my older sister. The same sister who had mocked my cheap sweater just an hour ago. The same sister who had tried to steal $10 million from me and frame Jasmine for a felony. I did not say a single word to her. I did not yell and I did not gloat. I simply looked right through her as if she were completely invisible. My absolute silence was far more devastating than any insult I could have thrown at her. Audrey choked on her own tears, realizing I was entirely unreachable. I turned my head away from her and looked directly at David Harrison, who was calmly organizing the foreclosure documents and putting them back into his leather briefcase. David, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and professional, I believe we have officially concluded all of our scheduled business here today. I am growing incredibly tired of all the noise. Would you mind contacting the building management and having security come up to the 20th floor to escort these trespassers out of the building? David smiled his sharp, predatory smile. It would be my absolute pleasure, Natalie, he replied. David pulled out his phone and made a quick, concise call to the front desk. Less than 2 minutes later, the heavy glass doors of the conference room swung wide open. 3 massive uniformed security guards stepped into the room. They looked highly annoyed by the disruption in their premium corporate building. "Excuse me," the lead guard said in a booming, authoritative voice. "You 3 need to vacate the premises immediately. You are causing a massive disturbance." Jason finally lifted his head from the glass table. He looked absolutely terrified. He slowly stood up, his expensive tailored suit wrinkled and his arrogant posture completely gone. He did not look at me or Jasmine. He just shuffled toward the door like a defeated zombie. Patricia could not even stand on her own. Jason had to grab her by the arm and forcefully haul her up from the carpet. She leaned heavily against him, crying uncontrollably, her designer handbag dragging pitifully against the floor. Audrey tried to argue with the guards, screaming that she rented this office space, but the guards simply grabbed her by the arms and physically pushed her toward the exit. The walk of shame began. I followed closely behind them, with Jasmine and David quietly watching the spectacle unfold. The security guards marched Patricia, Audrey, and Jason right down the center of the long, carpeted hallway. Dozens of highly successful professionals stepped out of their rented offices to watch the commotion. People were whispering, pointing, and even pulling out their phones to record the hysterical crying women and the completely defeated man. Audrey tried to hide her face behind her hands, completely humiliated that her wealthy corporate facade was being shattered in front of her prestigious peers. They were crammed into the express elevator with the armed guards. When the heavy doors opened on the ground floor, they were paraded directly through the busy, polished marble lobby. Hundreds of people watched as the once proud and arrogant family was literally thrown out the front doors and onto the cold, busy city sidewalk. They stumbled onto the concrete, completely stripped of their money, their homes, and their fake elite status. They had absolutely nothing left but each other, and they completely hated each other. The destruction was entirely public, profoundly humiliating, and absolutely permanent. The heavy glass doors of the conference room finally swung shut, cutting off the faint, fading sounds of the security guards escorting my ruined family down the long hallway. The sudden silence that fell over the 20th floor was profound and heavy. I turned away from the glass walls and looked back at the large oak table. David Harrison quietly packed the last of his legal documents into his leather briefcase, snapped the brass locks shut, and gave me a respectful nod. "I will be at my office if you need anything else to finalize the estate transfers," Natalie, David said smoothly. He walked out of the room, leaving just the 2 of us completely alone. Jasmine was still sitting in her leather chair, her hands resting flat on the table. She was staring blankly at the empty spot where Jason had signed the divorce petition just moments ago. Her chest was rising and falling in slow, deep breaths as her mind frantically tried to process the absolute whirlwind of destruction she had just witnessed. The monsters who had terrorized her, the husband who had stolen her wages, and the family who had actively tried to frame her for a felony crime were completely gone. They had been utterly erased from her life in a matter of 30 minutes. I walked slowly around the large glass table and stood right beside her chair. Jasmine looked up at me, her dark eyes wide with a mixture of absolute shock and overwhelming relief. "Natalie," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "Is it really over? Are they actually gone?" I reached down and gently pulled her up from the chair, wrapping my arms tightly around her shoulders in a fierce, protective hug. "It is completely over," I promised her, feeling the last remnants of tension physically leave her body as she hugged me back. "Jason will never be able to hurt you or control you ever again. You are entirely free from all of them." Jasmine let out a long, shaky breath and wiped a stray tear of pure joy from her cheek. She stepped back and looked at me, a genuine bright smile finally breaking through her disbelief. "Thank you," she said softly. "You saved my life today." I shook my head firmly. "You saved my life first, Jasmine. You drove 300 miles through a dangerous hurricane and offered to pawn your grandmother's wedding ring just to pay for my fake hospital bill. You were the only person in that entire toxic family who ever treated me with genuine kindness and respect. And because of that, I have a very important gift for you." I walked back over to my designer handbag and pulled out a thick, sleek leather folder. I carried it over to Jasmine and placed it gently into her hands. "Open it," I encouraged her. Jasmine looked down at the expensive leather, her brow furrowing in confusion. She slowly untied the black string and flipped open the heavy cover. Resting neatly inside was a stack of official property deeds and financial certificates. She picked up the first document and began to read the bold print at the top of the page. I watched her eyes scan the legal text, waiting for the exact moment she realized what she was holding. "This is a property deed," Jasmine mumbled, still confused. "It is for a penthouse apartment right here in the downtown financial district. But Natalie, my name is listed as the sole primary owner." "That is exactly right," I told her, a massive smile spreading across my face. "That is the deed to a stunning, fully paid $1.5 million luxury penthouse. It has 3 bedrooms, a massive gourmet kitchen, and a wraparound balcony overlooking the entire city skyline. It is located in a highly secure building with 24-hour concierge service. The property taxes and maintenance fees have already been prepaid for the next 20 years. It belongs entirely to you. Nobody can ever lock you out into the freezing cold again." Jasmine gasped loudly, her hands shaking so violently she nearly dropped the folder. $1.5 million, she repeated, completely stunned. "Natalie, I cannot accept a gift this massive. It is way too much." I gently pushed her hands back up. "You are accepting it," I insisted firmly. "And you need to look at the second document underneath the deed." Jasmine carefully moved the property deed aside and looked at the thick financial certificate beneath it. It was stamped with the official seal of a premier global wealth management bank. "That is a legally binding document establishing an irrevocable trust fund," I explained calmly, watching the sheer shock wash over her beautiful face all over again. "I deposited exactly $5 million in pure cash into that account this morning. It is completely untouchable by anyone except you. Jason cannot access a single dime of it, and no divorce judge can ever factor it into his settlements. It is designed to generate massive quarterly dividends for the rest of your life. You work incredibly hard to save children every single day. Now you can do that amazing work without ever having to worry about money. Welcome to your new life." Jasmine stared at the bank seal stamped on the bottom of the financial certificate. Her trembling fingers slowly traced the printed numbers, silently counting the zeros over and over again. $5 million. The sheer magnitude of that number was completely incomprehensible to a woman who had spent the last 7 years having her modest nursing wages systematically stolen from her bank account. She had been forced to account for every single penny she spent on groceries, terrified of triggering one of Jason's violent screaming fits. Now she was holding the physical proof of her absolute financial independence. She looked up at me, her vision completely blurred by heavy pooling tears. "Natalie," she choked out, her voice barely above a ragged whisper. "I cannot take this. I do not deserve this kind of money. I was just trying to do the right thing that night. I was just trying to make sure you were safe. That is exactly why you deserve every single penny of it," I said softly. I reached out and gently wiped a warm tear from her cheek. "You drove 300 miles in a severe storm with your last $300 to help a sister-in-law you barely even knew. You risked your own physical safety on flooded highways. You risked your own marriage. You risked the wrath of a highly abusive husband just to make sure I did not suffer alone in a hospital waiting room." I held her gaze, making absolutely sure she felt the profound sincerity in every single word I spoke. When I called my own mother, she told me my poverty was a choice and hung up the phone. When I called my own sister, she sent me an automated text message telling me to stop bothering her. They shared my exact blood, but they happily left me to die over a minor inconvenience. You were the only one who treated me like a human being when I had absolutely nothing to offer you in return. Jasmine let out a broken, agonizing sob, the kind of sound that comes from the deepest and most wounded part of a person's soul. "You are my real family now," I told her, my own voice thickening with heavy emotion. "And you are finally free." At those exact words, the invisible heavy chain that Jason had wrapped so tightly around her neck completely snapped. Jasmine broke down in tears of absolute joy and profound relief. She leaned forward across the heavy leather chair and buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently, as years of repressed trauma, constant fear, and deep exhaustion finally poured out of her. I wrapped my arms tightly around her back, holding her securely as she cried. For years she had carried the crushing weight of Jason's sick, coercive control. She had been intentionally isolated from her friends, financially starved, and repeatedly made to feel incredibly small and worthless. The psychological toll of that daily abuse had been an immense burden. I let her cry for as long as she needed. This was not a moment of sadness or grief. This was a massive emotional purge. The dark, terrifying shadow of my brother was being washed away completely with every single tear she shed. When her heavy sobs eventually slowed to quiet, steady hiccups, Jasmine slowly lifted her head. She looked remarkably different. The lingering baseline fear that had always lived right behind her beautiful dark eyes was entirely gone. In its place was a bright, shining spark of pure hope and incredible newfound strength. "What do I do now?" Jasmine asked, wiping her wet cheeks with the back of her hand, a small, genuine laugh finally escaping her lips. "I have never had this kind of total freedom before. I do not even know where to begin my life." "You begin by simply taking a deep breath," I told her with a warm, bright smile. "We are going to walk out of this rented corporate office, and we are never looking back at those terrible people again. We are going to drive back to our luxury hotel penthouse. We are going to order an absolutely ridiculous amount of expensive room service. And tomorrow morning, we are going to hire an interior designer to help you pick out custom furniture for your brand new home." Jasmine looked down at the thick leather folder resting safely in her lap. She gently ran her hand over the smooth cover, treating it like the most precious object in the entire world. Because it was exactly that. It was the absolute, undeniable proof of her salvation. "I always thought family meant blood," Jasmine whispered, her voice steadying and growing stronger. "I stayed with Jason for so long because I believed a good wife was supposed to endure immense hardships to keep her family together. I let him completely convince me that his daily cruelty was just normal marital stress." "Family is absolutely not defined by blood or legal marriage certificates," I replied firmly. "Family is defined by loyalty. It is defined by the incredible people who show up for you when you have absolutely nothing to offer them. It is defined by mutual respect, protection, and genuine care. My blood relatives prove today that they are nothing more than greedy, desperate parasites. You proved that you have a heart of pure gold. I stood up from my leather chair and offered her my hand. Jasmine took it immediately, her grip remarkably strong and completely steady. We stood together in the quiet glass conference room, two strong, independent women who had been systematically beaten down by the exact same toxic family, now standing completely victorious and infinitely wealthy. We walked out of the glass conference room together, leaving the shattered remains of my biological family behind us on the 20th floor. The carpeted hallway was entirely quiet now. The public spectacle of the eviction had completely passed, leaving only the normal hum of daily corporate business. We pressed the silver button for the elevator and waited. When the heavy metal doors slid open, we stepped inside and watched the digital floor numbers count down. It felt like every single floor we descended stripped away another heavy layer of the toxic trauma I had carried for 33 years. Jasmine stood beside me, holding her thick leather folder tightly against her chest, a soft and permanent smile resting on her beautiful face. We reached the ground floor lobby and walked past the massive marble security desk. The uniformed guards gave us a polite, respectful nod, a stark, incredible contrast to how they had physically dragged my mother and siblings out through this exact same space just 20 minutes prior. We pushed through the heavy glass revolving doors and stepped out onto the busy city sidewalk. The bright afternoon sun instantly hit our faces. The autumn air was crisp and cold, but it felt incredibly refreshing. It felt like the very first breath of real, unpolluted air I had ever taken in my entire life. The towering skyscrapers surrounding us did not feel intimidating anymore. They felt like giant, grand monuments to our brand new beginning. I looked down the busy street knowing exactly what was happening to the people who shared my DNA. Patricia was likely sitting on a public park bench in her ruined, expensive silk blouse, desperately calling wealthy friends who would instantly ignore her calls once they realized she had absolutely no money left. Jason was wandering the city completely terrified, jumping at every single passing police siren, just waiting for the federal agents to finally catch up to him for his massive wire fraud and his forged mortgages. And Audrey was probably sitting in the lobby of a cheap motel, agonizing over her impending federal prison sentence and her completely maxed out credit cards. They were all entirely trapped in the devastating prisons they had built with their own relentless greed and extreme arrogance. I had not laid a single trap for them today. I simply handed them the shovels and they enthusiastically dug their own graves. Meanwhile, Jasmine and I had the entire world waiting for us. I looked at the incredible African-American woman standing beside me in her stunning emerald green dress. "We are going to need to celebrate properly," I told her, wrapping my coat tightly against the autumn breeze. "I know a five-star restaurant just 2 blocks away. We can get a private table right by the window, order the most expensive appetizers on the entire menu, and start planning out the luxury interior design for your brand new penthouse apartment. And after that, we have to go to the bank to officially activate your $5 million trust fund." Jasmine laughed, a bright melodic sound that carried beautifully over the loud traffic of the busy city. "I would absolutely love that," she replied, linking her arm securely through mine. As we walked down the sunny pavement toward our new lives, the massive reality of my incredible journey completely settled into my soul. I had spent my entire life begging for tiny scraps of affection from a mother who despised me, a sister who mocked me, and a brother who stepped on my neck to make himself feel tall. I won $54 million, but the massive pile of cash was never the actual prize. The real prize was the absolute clarity it brought. The painful narration of my past was officially over. A new powerful voice took over my thoughts. Family isn't always blood. Blood just means you're related. Loyalty and respect mean you're family. I burned down my toxic family tree, but from the ashes, I found a real sister. Have you ever had a moment where an outsider treated you better than your own family? Or a time you realized your golden child sibling was actually a complete fraud? Tell me your story in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and remember, sometimes the best revenge is simply letting toxic people destroy themselves while you sit back and watch. The harrowing journey of Natalie and Jasmine serves as a powerful reminder of a profound universal truth. Blood does not automatically equate to loyalty, and shared DNA does not guarantee unconditional love. For too long, society has conditioned us to believe that we must endlessly forgive and endure the toxicity of our biological relatives simply because they are family. However, the core lesson learned from this story is that true family is forged through actions, not genetics. When Natalie was at her most vulnerable, facing a fabricated medical crisis, the people who shared her last name abandoned her without a second thought to protect their own superficial comfort. It was Jasmine, an outsider by blood, but a sister in spirit, who sacrificed her safety, her meager finances, and her well-being to offer genuine care. This stark contrast highlights that family is a verb. It is the consistent act of showing up, offering respect, and providing a safe harbor during the darkest storms of life. Furthermore, the story teaches us the vital importance of setting boundaries and recognizing our own intrinsic worth. We do not have to accept the degrading roles assigned to us by toxic relatives. When we stop seeking validation from those who are committed to misunderstanding and diminishing us, we create the necessary space to find the people who truly value us. Walking away from a destructive biological family is not an act of betrayal, it is an act of profound self-preservation. From the ashes of broken familial expectations, we can build a chosen family rooted in mutual respect and authentic support. Take a moment today to evaluate the relationships in your life and boldly choose to invest your energy only in those who genuinely invest their hearts in you.